The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes? Greetings, I'm Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer, USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for stardate negative 269372.1. Now, today we're going to be talking about tactical simulations. What does that mean? What am I talking about? All right, so let's start at the beginning. I'm going to be doing a bit of a recap, explaining just exactly what we are, who we are, what we do, and then get into today's topic. So let's dive right in. So, what is the USS Dauntless? We're a Star Trek fan club based in Cape Town, South Africa. We're a Starfleet style club, complete with ranks, titles, uniforms, and all that kind of thing. Um, just making sure my audio is going. It is. That's fine. Good. Okay. So we are primarily an online group, but not exclusively an online group. We do a lot of stuff in person as well. We have local groups in cities around the world called away teams, and we engage in all kinds of activities, both online and in person. And what is it? What is the guiding principle under which these activities are organized? Well, that is our mission. So our principal mission is to bring the message of Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future of humankind to the people of Africa and the Middle East. Who's Gene Roddenberry? Well, he's this guy. He's the guy who created Star Trek. He was the original executive producer for Star Trek, the original series, first few feature films, Star Trek: The Next Generation. Although hundreds of people have worked on the franchise since then, it was his brainchild. He got the ball rolling. He was the one who had the vision for the Star Trek universe. And what is that? It's the vision of the future of humankind, which is an optimistic future in which most, if not all, of the problems that we face today have been solved through human endeavor, social progress, economic revival, technological advancement, and so on. And pretty much all of the issues that we face today have been eliminated: crime, poverty, disease, war. If not throughout the Federation, then at least on Earth. And that is all depicted in the Star Trek television series, feature films, etc. So we are a fan club devoted to that vision, Star Trek, and we are interested in bringing about that future of of humanity. But we have broken down into a number of standing orders, the priority in which we focus on different aspects of that, completing that broader mission. And today we're going to be talking about standing order number one, which is to promote Star Trek to our friends, families, and the people around us. Last week, I think it was, we did a briefing video like this talking about civilian outreach, which is the part in which we promote it to our friends, families, and the people around us. That's the primary fulfillment of standing order number one, but there are various other aspects to that, and one of which that we're going to be talking about today is Star Trek gaming. And that's what we mean when we talk about tactical simulations. Because we're a Starfleet style group, a lot of the language that we use is sort of stylized in the theme of Star Trek. So tactical simulations is really just kind of a metaphor that we use to describe gaming and other similar activities, typically competitive, usually with some kind of a simulated violence component, but not always. Not always competitive either, for that matter. Sometimes we work collaboratively in various different activities that relate to gaming. Now, the Dauntless is not a gaming group. We're not a role-playing group, as it says back here. What the Dauntless isn't. We're not a role-playing group, although we do sometimes play some role-playing games. That is not our primary function. We are not a gaming clan, although we do sometimes play some games together. Those are just some of the activities that we engage in as a part of our day-to-day, but that is not what we do principally. Principally, our mission is to bring the message of Gene Roddenberry's vision of future of humankind to the people of Africa and the Middle East in various different ways and forms. All right, so what do we do for gaming? What are we talking about? What examples are we talking about? So let's look at some of the more explicit and obvious examples, one of which is Star Trek Online. Star Trek Online is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Anybody can play. It's free to play on multiple platforms, PC, Xbox, PlayStation, I think that's it. I think those are all the platforms that matter anyway. You can play for free. You can download it today, and you can get started. There are plenty of in-game purchases you can make to streamline your experience if you wish to, but essentially it is free to play, which is quite nice. Star Trek Online has been going for many years and as such there is a lot of content in the game. There are two primary game modes. One is space combat, when you're flying a starship like this, and the other one is ground combat, when your character is running around on the surface of the planet, or perhaps you're beaming to other ships and you're running around there. And that is what that looks like. So you develop your character, who is your Starfleet officer, or Klingon officer, or Romulan officer, and then you develop and build up your skill tree, acquire equipment, including starships, and that is a lot of fun. Now, there's a social element to Star Trek Online, as is typical for these kinds of games, and that is what they call a fleet. And we, the USS Dauntless, have a fleet in game. So members of the USS Dauntless are able to collaborate together on activities in the game of Star Trek Online, which we do regularly. At the moment, we're running a weekly Star Trek Online mission every Wednesday night, thanks to Colonel Hubert, who facilitates that for us. And we'll get together in the game and do all kinds of stuff. Depending on how many crew members participate, we can either do some task force operations, TFOs, which are sort of group content, or perhaps we can do some missions together in the game. We can work on whatever the current event is that's happening, and that is a fun and collaborative way to immerse ourselves in the Star Trek experience. What's nice about Star Trek Online, among many things that's nice about the game, is that the writers of the game are lovers of the Star Trek franchise, so they really delve deep into the lore, and although they're writing new stories for Star Trek Online, which are not considered canon in and of themselves, they do a masterful job of weaving together disparate threads, tying up loose ends of the Star Trek canon universe into interesting new narratives, proposing new ideas, fleshing out stuff that was only touched upon tangentially in canon, and they've turned them into really big elements within Star Trek Online. Very interesting, a lot of fun, very engaging, but mostly it's great from a social point of view. What's nice about it for us is that we get to play this collaboratively. So when we're playing Star Trek Online, we're all playing on the same team, although we are there's sort of a lot of simulated violence in the game. We are directing that violence against NPCs, non-player characters. So we're playing against the environment, PvE, player versus environment. And that is, that's a fun way to play. It means that there are very strict guidelines over how we're able to play the game. There are rules that are strictly enforced by the game system itself. So something like cheating is virtually impossible in an MMO. I wouldn't say completely impossible. Of course, there are always people that figure ways around these things, but you have to try pretty hard to cheat in an MMO. Generally speaking, it's simply not possible. We can just relax and enjoy the experience and do whatever the game allows us to do, which is pretty cool. So Star Trek Online is one of the activities we do. Another game that we play more or less actively, that is, the Dauntless supports actively, is a game called Star Trek CCG. I'm just going to let this run in the background, this video here. Star Trek CCG. CCG stands for Customizable Card Game, or more commonly known these days as a trading card game, not unlike Magic the Gathering. Star Trek CCG is almost as old as Magic the Gathering. It was one of the first commercially available TCGs back in the 90s. It has since fallen off the radar from a commercial point of view. It is no longer a commercial product, but when it was discontinued by the manufacturer, Decipher Incorporated, well over a decade now, in fact, close on 20 years at this point, frankly. When that happened, a team of fans of the game, sort of players, as well as former game designers from Decipher Incorporated, formed a non-profit organization called the Trek Continuing Committee, and they received permission from Paramount to continue releasing expansion sets for the game, for Star Trek CCG, as long as they did so with no commercial entanglement whatsoever. So the game is free to play. What you do is you go to the website trekcc.org, create an account. You can then download all of the cards in the game, print them yourself, build your own decks. It's probably easier to build a deck using their online deck building tool and print out the deck that you're going to build, and then you can play them on paper, or you can use this free software that they're demonstrating in this video here, a platform called Lackey, which allows us to play the game online. Again, completely free. It's free on purpose because there's simply no commercial engagement allowed. The downside of Star Trek CCG that is that the content of the game, the Star Trek content in the game, is frozen at the point at which the commercial contract was broken with Decipher and Paramount, which means that although the game designers have an extensive library of images and other content that they're allowed to use in developing these new expansions of Star Trek CCG cards, that stopped after the production of Star Trek Enterprise. So everything from the 2009 film onwards, in terms of production release, none of those things can be included in Star Trek CCG probably forever. So it's a bit of a window back in time. We have a very kind of limited subset of the Star Trek franchise that we're allowed to use in the game. And in fact, even at that time, Star Trek the animated series was considered non-canon. So there's no TAS content in the game either. It is now, of course, considered canon. Things have changed in the last 20 years or so, but that means that there's a whole section of the Star Trek universe that we can just never have in Star Trek CCG, which is unfortunate, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a fun and engaging game, and the fact that it's free to play is a major step in the right direction. There are, in fact, two different games. Star Trek CCG First Edition and Second Edition are both playable, and both editions of the game are continuing to receive upgrades and updates, with new expansions being released every few months by the continuing committee. So that's a cool system that we support. So Star Trek CCG, how do we support it? Well, we haven't supported it for a few years. We used to be fairly active in it back in the 20 teens. I was even the regional champion in the 2019 regional championship, and I remain undefeated in that championship because that was the last one that was held in this region. Because the following year, of course, the world came to a screeching halt, and that competitive scene has not yet been resurrected in this part of the world. Um, uh, so we used to have regular Star Trek CCG games before the world came to an end back in 2020, and we're starting now to sort of begin resurrecting that a little bit. We've got a small player group here in Cape Town, South Africa, that I've been introducing to the game and trying to coax them through building their own decks, many of whom are in the call today, which is great. Good to see you guys. And that is something that I'm hoping to see we can get up on its feet again in the future. So Star Trek CCG is kind of the polar opposite when it comes to Star Trek Online, in that the game itself doesn't enforce its rules. So, as with any tabletop game, you as a player are expected to conform to the rules yourself. The mechanics of the game happen in the minds of yourself and your opponent, and so it is up to you to make sure that everything is on the up and up, where everybody kind of trusts that their opponent is doing things correctly, but there's also a trust but verify kind of relationship. We did a video a couple of months back on the values of Starfleet, and one of those was the trust but verify principle, where you're trusting that your team member or your opponent is doing what they're supposed to be doing, but it's always a good idea just to make sure that everything is happening the way it should. So trust but verify is a principle that's worth employing when you're playing tabletop games in general, Star Trek CCG in particular. But what other games do we play? So those are the ones that we support kind of most formally, but we play other games too. We had a tabletop gaming day here in my quarters just a few days ago, and one of the games we played there was Star Trek Catan. So Catan, or used to be called Settlers of Catan, is a popular board game, and there is a Star Trek edition of that game, which has some unique Star Trek flavor to it, which is a lot of fun. And I have a copy of it, and so we like to play that. There's no sort of formal tournament structure around that, at least not within the Dauntless, but that is something that we can play. Games like that. There are plenty of other popular tabletop systems that have been adapted for the Star Trek license. Things like Monopoly, Scrabble, Klingon Boggle, unfortunately, is not real as far as I know. It was mentioned in The Big Bang Theory and everybody wants it, but to my knowledge, it doesn't actually exist. But there are various other tabletop games that have been adapted for the Star Trek franchise, and that's always fun for us to do. Um, Another system that we play, or another gaming activity that we engage in, is weekly game nights. So typically on a Friday night, we would gather here on Discord and we would watch that week's new episode of Star Trek. But there isn't always a new episode of Star Trek every week. So what do we do in the periods in between? So what we've been doing in this gap that we've been waiting since the release of Star Trek Prodigy Season 2, and while we're waiting for Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5, we've had a few weeks gap. Every week we've been playing some online games together on Friday night in that same slot. And the game we've been playing is Among Us, which you may be familiar with. It's a fairly simple game, but it boils down to sort of a game of bluffing. One member of the core is randomly selected as being an imposter or a murderer. It's kind of a murder mystery game, and has to their objective is to go through and murder everybody else on the team. The rest of the team's job is to complete their tasks and also identify the murderer. One of the interesting things about this game is that it is both collaborative and competitive because the entire team are working against um, both the clock and working against the one person who is the imposter, but nobody knows who the imposter is until right at the end. So that's an interesting and stimulating game, and it offers us some opportunity to socialize together online. We can get on voice chat and all play on our own devices at home. And again, Among Us is available on most platforms, just about everywhere, and that's a cool game. What's interesting about um, games like Among Us is that what separates it apart from Star Trek Online. Star Trek Online it's impossible to cheat because we're all working collaboratively. We're all working on the same team. With Among Us, that's not necessarily the case because you've got that one person who is randomly selected who is the imposter, and there is a strong social pressure within the game to enforce certain rules. So, for example, when the game begins, the the person who is the imposter is notified of the fact that they are the imposter. Nobody else knows who that is. So it's very obvious on that person's screen, and nobody else can tell who it is until people start dying. That means that when you're playing, your screen has to remain secret. Nobody else is allowed to see your screen, which is fine if everyone is playing from their own room. But when you have multiple players playing in the same room, that can lead to complications. So, for example, Commander Patterson, who is my partner, she and I play in the same room. Typically, our gaming PCs are placed side by side. I'm busy looking at my game PC because that's where my camera is, but hers is here off to my left. And when we're playing other games, that's typically how we play. But when we play a game like Among Us, where we could potentially be working against each other, we wouldn't even know that's the case. It would therefore be inappropriate for us to play in such a way that we can see each other's screens. So when she and I play Among Us or other similar games, I spin around and use this old PC behind me so that we can still be sitting in the same room together. We can still be engaging in the same activity simultaneously, but I'm facing one way, she's facing a different way, and that way we don't inappropriately and inadvertently share information with each other during the game, because sharing information in that way would be cheating. So we want to make sure that we're not behaving inappropriately, even though it might be physically awkward for us to do so. Um, there are other games and other game-like activities that we engage in. So one that we did not that long ago, I think I've looked through all of these already. Yes, okay, we'll get to that in a moment. When we did not that long ago was laser tag. Things like paintball also would count as tactical simulations, gaming, I suppose you could call it, because it's a competitive activity or competitive slash collaborative if you're on a team game. And that also counts, even though it's a physical game out in the real world and would also qualify as combat training for our combat training challenge. It is also a game. It also would count as a tactical simulation. We also, on a monthly basis, have a trivia quiz here on Discord, which I typically facilitate. I will put up a number of questions in a few rounds, and I will pose those questions to members of the Dauntless who have the opportunity to guess and to demonstrate their intellectual prowess against each other. That, although it doesn't I'm not sure it really qualifies as a game exactly because there's no kind of simulation involved. We're all just answering a list of questions that is competitive with each other. And again, we have to be mindful of making sure that we're not accidentally doing things like Googling answers or sharing information with people in the room. So that's another example of, even though the commander's PC is right here next to me, and she will typically sit next to me while we're participating in the quiz, although I'm not answering the quiz questions, I'm presenting the quiz, she has to be careful not to look at my screen while I am preparing the quiz questions ahead of time. Typically, I'll be sitting here at my desk doing that work, and she'll be elsewhere in the room waiting for a signal that I've finished. Perhaps she can sit in her office upstairs or something like that. That's a thing that happens. So quiz is another place where we have to rely on the honor system. We have to rely on the honor and integrity of the other members of the team who are participating, because we wouldn't want anybody to be cheating. Other things that we've done in the past, we've had competitive gaming tournaments, especially in Star Trek CCG, which was a lot of fun. It's been a long time since we've had that kind of thing. Really, what we need in order to facilitate a competitive gaming tournament is a sufficiency of members of the Dauntless who are interested in participating competitively in a given game so that we can get that going. I'm hoping we can do that with Star Trek CCG. That would be nice. Other tabletop games that I've got an interest in getting competitive gaming tournaments up and running for are Star Trek Attack attack wing, which I've got plenty of figures for. I don't have any within line of sight here, but that's a fun game. It's worth Googling if you like. It would be fun to get back into that game. Star Trek HeroClix, although it's increasingly difficult to get hold of the hardware for that game these days. But even non-Star Trek related games could be fun as a competitive thing. Like Among Us is another example of a non-Star Trek related game. Even things like Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone, anything like that could be a valid outlet for competitive gaming tournaments. It's just not something that we currently host, but it could be something we'd be interested in pursuing in the future. Chess is another good example. Thank you, Kamani Shimani. All right, so I've been kind of hinting about this, and maybe it's time to we dive into this, and that is Starfleet values and gaming ethics. So there are certain Starfleet values that, again, I covered in a briefing video like this a few months back, where we're talking about you know what, let's just get rid of this. Let's talk without the distraction. There we go. All right. When I was talking about what the values are of being a Starfleet officer, and the first item on the list then was that our first duty is to the truth of any given situation. We want to be as honest as is practically possible at any given time. And that relates to gaming in that, firstly, everybody in a game, at least in principle, in theory, is on an equal footing. And if the rules of the game require that we not breach sort of a firewall of information, that means sharing information inappropriately with an opponent, which would be cheating in the case of something like Among Us, or perhaps sharing information with somebody else's opponent. So say you're sitting next to a player playing Star Trek CCG, and you're indicating to the person across the table what the person next to you has in their hand or something like that, that would be a violation of our first duty, being to the truth. The truth is the truth, not only as it is represented in the world, sort of physical truth, objective truth, but also the truth of the values and the principles of the gaming system in question. Another thing that's important about gaming is that your achievement in a game is based on the effort you put in. It's meant to be, again, starting on an equal footing so that everybody begins from the same place, and then you put in effort and you achieve based on that. Now, you can argue that certain games have a way for you to bypass that constraint. Star Trek Online, for example, allows you to make microtransactions, which allow you to purchase material in game. Which is to say, Cryptic, the company that facilitates Star Trek Online, they argue that the materials that you can buy with money don't provide any kind of material gameplay advantage. That is whether or not you agree with that is a matter for debate. I don't necessarily always agree with it, but it's worth considering. But generally speaking, in most games, your ability to perform in a game is based on your skill and the effort that you put in order to not only hone your skill, but also build the material in with which you're playing. Something like chess, you don't get to build the material. You have a set number of pieces, but in something like Star Trek CCG or Star Trek Attack Wing, you have a collection and you have an army or a deck or a pre-built set of material that you take into the game, and having built that is the effort that you've put into it, both within the game and outside the game. It's sort of a meta tactical level. There are also games where you work either as a team or as an individual, and it's important to remember which type of game you're playing. So when we're playing Star Trek Online, we're playing as a team, and then we want to be doing everything we can to make sure that the team succeeds. But when you're playing as an individual, so when you're playing Star Trek CCG or Among Us or something like that, you want to be maintaining the integrity of the system by not sharing inappropriate information with other players. That would be detrimental to the game system as a whole. Which means that, which brings us to the point that our first duty, being to the truth, is also the truth of functioning within the rules of any given scenario. So that means whether that's in life, whether that's in our Starfleet duties, or whether that's within the context of a gaming system. And it all boils down to integrity, which is about promoting fair play, honesty, and respect for opponents. So opponents is an interesting term, and I'm reminded of my experience in martial arts, specifically historical European martial arts. So when you're sword fighting against somebody, there's a strong cultural tendency to want to think of that person as your enemy, as your opponent, but actually that is not the accepted nomenclature within the fencing world. You consider the person at the other end of your sword your partner, because you are fighting together, you're learning together, you're training together, honing your skills off of each other. Even if that person is your opponent in a tournament setting and you're hoping to score points and beat the person, at least in, not physically beat them, well, I suppose you are physically beating them a little bit, but you're also hoping to beat them in terms of points, they are still your partner. You're on the same side, you're engaging in that activity together. And the only, and one of the reasons why you're hoping to beat that person is you're hoping to motivate them to become better at the game than you. So you are in it together, you are on the same team, even if you're opposing each other. Partners and opponents are really the same thing. So it's important to maintain that level of respect for the people who are on the other side of the game, because they are actually on your side. And that means honoring the framework of the challenge that demonstrates the respect for you. Let me try that again. All right. So honoring the framework of the challenge demonstrates respect for and trust in your teammates and your opponents alike, because again, your opponents are your teammates. And the thing about failing to follow the rules correctly by cheating, in other words, is that it's disrespectful. So you're disrespecting your teammates, you're disrespecting your opponents, who again are also your teammates, and you're disrespecting the confines and the structure in which the activity takes place. So you want to make sure that you are operating with as much integrity as you possibly can within any given situation. Because um, being caught cheating. So if you cheat and you get caught, which you will, it's kind of inevitable, because the people here, especially on the Dauntless, we are observant and intelligent people. We will spot you cheating eventually. Um, it will cause your team to lose trust in you, in your integrity, in your ability to perform your duties, and whether or not they can trust that you are telling the truth. And again, a staff lead officer's first duty is to the truth. Now, I put up a video not that long ago about building a reputation, both internally and externally, and it would be detrimental to your reputation if people were to suspect you of cheating. Because it demonstrates a poor character, frankly. It demonstrates poor character, poor judgment, and a poor association with the truth. But this brings me to an example which, I don't know what that was. There we go. Which brings me to an example from the Star Trek canon, which is kind of problematic when we're talking about this kind of thing, and that is the Kobayashi Maru problem. So the Kobayashi Maru is it's a test at Starfleet Academy, where um, command cadets are required to subject to a test which is impossible. They are required to, the simulation is that they are the captain of a starship and they are assigned to rescue a ship in distress, the Kobayashi Maru, and attempting to rescue that ship will trigger what's the word? An attack. It'll trigger an attack by Klingon ships and you will be destroyed. So you are destroyed and the Kobayashi Maru are destroyed, and there's simply no way out of the test. The test is designed to be impassable. The idea being that it is a test not of your ability to command a starship or to solve a tactical situation, but rather your ability to handle no-win scenarios. Now, famously, Captain Kirk he cheated the scenario. If essentially, we actually see this happen in this 2009 Star Trek film, in which Captain Kirk, or at that point Cadet Kirk, runs through the scenario and he basically hacks the computer, changes the rules so that it can be beaten. Now, this is not explicitly against the rules of the scenario, which is part of what he argues in his defense trial, which happens almost immediately afterwards, because when you're cheating, you get caught, and he got caught cheating. It turned out that Spock was the person who programmed the scenario to begin with, and although there was no explicit rule against changing the rules of the scenario, it was most certainly against the spirit of the scenario, and there was a complicated and interesting moral argument between these two men, one making the point that the scenario itself was unfair and was unjustified and should never have been programmed in that way, and the other arguing that it was against the rules and cheating, therefore, to reprogram the scenario. So we never actually get to see the end of that conversation. We know that in the Prime universe, in the Prime timeline, Kirk was able to go on and become captain of a starship, so presumably it was resolved in some way or another, but we don't actually know the resolution. What we are left with is those questions hanging in the air, and we're forced to derive our own conclusions about it. But Either way, the Kobayashi Maru and Captain Kirk coming up with his own creative solution to the Kobayashi Maru is, at the very least, controversial and at most potentially cheating. So, in other words, we should be taking that situation seriously and not simply sweeping it under the rug and say something like, oh, but it was fine for Captain Kirk to cheat, because clearly it wasn't fine. He was court-martialed for it. And although he might have been able to argue his way out of that court-martial, the fact that everybody reacted in that way to that situation should tell you about how serious it is, because frankly, his character was being called into question when he did those things. Another way that we exercise our Starfleet values when gaming is that we want to avoid toxic behavior, like harassment, for example. It can get easy to get carried away, especially when games carry a certain emotional weight to them. You might get carried away with your language and the way that you speak to the people around you, and it's important to maintain a respectful atmosphere in which we are kind and supportive to the people around us. A little bit of trash talk probably doesn't help, but also be mindful of who is in the room and monitor how people are responding to the way that you're speaking. If people are not taking your trash talk well, perhaps it's time to dial it back and maybe throw in a quick apology. That wouldn't be the worst thing to throw in, because frankly, games are supposed to be fun. They're meant to be enjoyable, and bad behavior of any kind, whether it's cheating or toxic behavior, it just breaks the experience for everybody and makes it so that other people don't want to participate. Another way that gaming enforces and or not enforces, but encourages our Starfleet values, triggers our Starfleet values, is in our pursuit of excellence. So mission readiness is something that we are interested in pursuing, which is um, making ourselves the best possible version of ourselves. And gaming allows us to do that in a real way. There are practical, real skills that we can pick up from various different kinds of games, whether it's learning how to bluff in Among Us, whether it's learning how to improving your hand-eye coordination in Star Trek Online, or perhaps mastering your ability to navigate complex systems or perceive spaces in 3 dimensions, that kind of thing. There are various skills of varying levels of practicality that are obtainable in just about any gaming system if you look hard enough. And so we can use those games to help us become better versions of ourselves. So that is part of our dedication to mission readiness, which is our code again for self-improvement. So our pursuit of excellence is encouraged through our use of gaming as a tool. Um, so let's just recap. I think those are all the main items I wanted to cover today. So, first of all, gaming is an important tool for us, both from a recruiting point of view, because we can use gaming as a fun thing that we can present to potential new recruits. It's also valuable to us as a social tool because it provides us an opportunity to do things together. It provides us an opportunity to better ourselves through mission readiness by mastering certain skills, by simulating certain skills as well, by understanding not only the Star Trek universe but the world around us. Um, but it also allows us an opportunity to practice in a sort of controlled environment the things that set us apart, and that is our Starfleet values, our commitment to truth and integrity and trustworthiness, and to help build our reputation in within the context of our crew, and that's quite important. So I would like to encourage each and every member of the crew, if you're not already doing so, to get involved in our various gaming activities. No matter what hardware situation you have, whether you have a desktop or a laptop or a phone, even if you have an Apple device, I believe those are capable of running some of these games as well. So Star Trek Online, Star Trek CCG, various different tabletop games are available. Please come and join us. You'll find in the Dauntless Discord a channel called Tactical. It'll be right now down near the bottom. That is where we can talk about general gaming stuff. And there are 2 separate channels directly under Tactical, one devoted to Star Trek Online, one devoted to Star Trek CCG, where we can talk about those gaming systems in particular. It's worth a mention about the history of how we've managed gaming activity here in the Dauntless. So for the longest time, we had a Marine strike group embedded on the Dauntless. Marines Starfleet Marine Corps is a division of Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association Incorporated, and the Marine Corps is a special interest group within Starfleet International that has a kind of more formal military style aesthetic. And our Marine unit that we had on board was responsible for facilitating our gaming related activities for a long time. But early this year, that kind of fell apart, and we decided to reorganize how we did that. So our local Marine Strike Group was shut down for the time being. I've heard some rumblings that we might be able to get it up and running again in the foreseeable future, but to my knowledge, that hasn't yet happened. When we do, that won't be their function anymore. They will work differently within the confines of the Dauntless structure. So now any of our gaming activity falls under tactical, which is not a department yet. Could be a department in the future. For now, it's just an area of interest. So if you are interested in gaming, go down to the tactical channel and read up on all of that stuff down there. You can also find links and various other information to the gaming systems that we support. Again, Star Trek Online, Star Trek CCG, and various other things like that. If you have any questions about those or any others, please feel free to drop those questions in that channel. I or one of the other gaming related people will be happy to address those queries. All right, so I've talked a lot. Let's see if we have any questions. There's been a lot of activity in the chat here in Discord. Just a quick reminder. So we stream these live to the Dauntless Discord every Tuesday at 12:30, which I acknowledge is an awkward time, middle of the day on a Tuesday. Not everybody can make it. So I appreciate those who are able to join us. At the moment in the chat, we have Captain Van Groenen, we've got Lieutenant Commander Shimali, we've got Master Chief Kotza, Senior Chief Newton, and Petty Officer Third Class Matthews. Thank you for joining us here in the chat today. Those of you who are in the chat are welcome to drop questions in the chat. I will try to address them at some point during our discussion. Those who are not able to join us in Discord because you're not an active duty member of the crew, you are welcome to join us on YouTube. We typically stream it there live as well, and I'm sometimes able to see any comments that are posted there. Otherwise, if you can't join us at streaming time, you're welcome to download the video later, or at least watch the video later from YouTube or from Facebook, and feel free to drop questions in the comments there. You can also address questions to me privately if you wish, and I can either answer them directly in the moment, or after the fact, or perhaps even in an upcoming video. So let's see if we've had a lot of discussion, but I'm seeing lots of gifts and not a lot of questions. We've had some problems dealing with the emergency medical hologram, who's been rude, and he's demonstrating new behavior, which is interesting. Okay, let's see. Sometimes with shanking, sometimes not. I think we're talking about Among Us there. That's interesting. Space Magic, that's good. Sadly, most of them are being laid off at the moment from Cryptic. Yes, I believe that Cryptic, which is the company that runs Star Trek Online, has recently been acquired by somebody else. So they're going through some corporate shakeups at the moment. That's the kind of thing that happens, unfortunately, but there you go. Captain Van Kernen reminds us that there are tribbles in the card game as well. So Star Trek CCG has tribble cards. That's true. In fact, there is an entirely separate mini game called the Tribbles TCG, which uses the tribbles cards from Star Trek CCG first edition, and they are playable as a standalone game. I believe there's even a tournament scene for that game on its own, which is interesting. All right. Captain Van Kernen says, Quiz Night, where we learn that green does not equal Orion. That's true. Not all Orions are green, and not all green people are Orions. That's good to know. Lieutenant Shamali reminds us of chess. Yes, chess is something we should probably look into fleshing out a little bit. I think that would be an interesting thing. Unfortunately, 3D chess, which is of course the version of chess that we see in Star Trek, I'm told that it simply doesn't work. There have been various attempts by various people over the years to publish a set of rules for the three-dimensional chessboard. You've probably seen this in Star Trek, right? You don't remember it. It's a chessboard that has 3 layers, one there, one there, one there, and it has various little mini sideboards off to the side. And ostensibly, it's a game descended from the chess game that we're familiar with, but it operates in 3 dimensions. So you're able to move from one board and up and down or whatever. But that's kind of the problem, is that there is no coherent set of rules that really works. At least I'm told. I haven't tried any of these systems myself, but this is the feedback that I hear from people who have made the attempt. For whatever reason, that's a problem that remains mathematically unsolved, but perhaps by the 23rd century, scientists will have figured out how to make chess in 3D. But that doesn't mean we can't still play chess. Chess is a great game. It's an ancient game. It's from our region, more or less. So it's worth exploring that as an option that we can consider. Um, Captain Pinkerton says Checkers, which is a very nice supermarket. Um, Master Chief Costa says, the classic prisoner's dilemma, a game theory thought experiment that involves two rational agents, each of whom can cooperate for mutual benefit or betray their partner, defect for individual reward. Not sure what that was directly in reference to, but it certainly is an interesting aspect of game theory. Chief Quartz asks, did we have a geocache group in the past? Not exactly. So we did have active support for a game called Pokemon Go, which is similar to geocaching in the way that it works. Geocaching is a game, or kind of a game, where you can you download an app for your phone and you can find out where there is a geocache, which is typically a small object that's hidden somewhere in the world. You can then use your GPS to go and hunt it down and see what that device is, and you can interact with it, maybe take some away, maybe put something else there, and update the geocache. Pokemon Go is an augmented reality game set in the Pokemon fictional universe, which uses a similar kind of system, but the objects in the game are not real physical objects, they are virtual objects, and you can interact with them via your augmented reality device, your handheld device, your palm, your pad. Commander Shamali is interested in the geocache. Yes, that's certainly something we can pursue. Once again, your idea, your project. So please go ahead and do the thing. Senior Chief Newton asks, what about Fizbin? Yes, Fizbin was a game that we learned about in Star Trek, the original series, called The Piece of the Action. It was a game that Captain Kirk tried to teach to the Sigma Iosians. The problem with Fizbin is that, like 3D chess, it also has no coherent set of rules because Captain Kirk was making it up as he went along. So it's not a playable game, but we can certainly try. Captain Pinkuna says Ingress was a lot more fun than Pokemon Go. Yes, Ingress was another game, or is another game that is manufactured by the same people who make Pokemon Go. It's similar sort of game. I think it was less supported once Pokemon Go came out. It was just a more popular version of a very similar mechanic. But I played them both and they're both cool. I think they've got one or two more games in their stable now that use the same basic system. So Fizbin is Flux. Commander Shimani says, right. So Flux is another one of those tabletop games that has released a Star Trek version. I've got a copy of it in the cabinet over there. I can't reach it from where I'm sitting. But yes, I agree. It's also incomprehensible. I haven't yet figured out how to play it. So perhaps that can be a project for the science department. Okay, so I think we've covered everything we need to cover there. I just got one more thing I'd like to say before I sign off, and that is that we as Starfleet officers challenge ourselves and each other to become the best version of ourselves. Gaming is one way that we can measure our progress against each other in a fun and collaborative environment. It allows us the opportunity to not only sharpen our cognitive skills, but also practice the values of Starfleet as they relate to sportsmanship and being a good, trustworthy person. Thank you. That is all for today. You are dismissed. Swart out.